The cold, unfamiliar scent of dust filled the air. Thick and stale, it clung to everything in the room, to the skin, to the lungs. It was the smell of a place that had been abandoned for too long, but it was also strangely familiar. A memory buried deep inside the mind that stirred with unease. Slowly, a pair of tired eyes blinked open. For a moment, there was nothing but a haze of confusion. The world felt too large, too foreign. The pale light of the morning filtered through cracked curtains, casting a yellowish tint over the room. A bed. His bed. No, it was an old-fashioned bed, the kind with intricate carvings on the headboard, faded and chipped from years of use. He could feel the weight of the blankets pressing against his body, but the soft cotton felt odd, out of place. He pushed himself upright, his head throbbing. A dull ache lingered behind his eyes, making it hard to focus. Something was wrong. There was a nagging sensation at the back of his mind, like a thought he was trying to remember but couldn't quite grasp. The room was quiet, too quiet. There were no sounds of the outside world, no chirping birds or distant car engines. Only silence, heavy and oppressive. He glanced around the room, his gaze scanning the familiar yet strange surroundings. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing patches of discolored drywall beneath. A faded rug covered the floor, the edges worn thin from years of foot traffic. He stood up, his legs trembling as if they'd forgotten how to support him. A dull ache echoed through his joints, as though he'd been asleep for far longer than he realized. With slow, cautious steps, he moved toward the door. His hand hesitated on the knob. It was old, the brass tarnished with age. It felt wrong in his grip, as though it hadn't been touched in years. He turned the knob and stepped out into the hallway. The house was large, too large. The hallway stretched on, longer than he remembered, with doors on either side, each one closed, hiding secrets behind them. The walls were adorned with old photographs, their edges curled and yellowed. Faces stared out from the frames, people he should have recognized. But they were strangers to him. There were children, women, men, all smiling, all in a world he could not recall. Each step he took echoed through the empty house, the sound unsettling in its loneliness. He reached for one of the doors, drawn by an inexplicable need to open it, to find something, anything that might explain why he was here. But when his hand touched the doorknob, he froze. A feeling of dread washed over him, cold and suffocating. His heart began to race, the thudding in his chest loud and harsh. His fingers shook as they pulled away from the knob. He couldn't remember why, but something told him not to open that door. The hallway twisted and turned in ways he didn't expect, as if the house was shifting around him. There were doors, but they didn't lead to rooms, just more hallways. He walked for what felt like hours, the walls closing in, the air thickening around him with each step. The house was alive. He could feel it, an oppressive presence that seemed to watch him, to whisper to him from the shadows. Every creak of the floorboards was a voice, every groan of the walls a warning. And then, from somewhere far off, a sound echoed through the house, a soft, rhythmic thumping. The noise sent a chill down his spine, his breath caught in his throat. What was that? He followed the sound, drawn to it against his better judgment. The hallway opened into a large room, its walls lined with dark wood panels. The air was even colder here, and the thumping was louder, as though it were coming from beneath the floorboards. He knelt down, his fingers trembling as they brushed over the wooden planks, the noise now deafening in his ears. It was coming from below. Something was buried there. The thumping grew frantic, desperate. He pressed harder, trying to pull up the floorboard, but the wood was stuck, stubborn. The thumping stopped. His heart pounded in his chest. He pulled harder, the splinters digging into his skin, and then with one final tug, the board came loose. The sight beneath the floor was not what he expected. There was nothing, no dirt, no hidden treasure, but a dark, hollow pit. He stared into it, a black void that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, from deep within that darkness came a voice, a whisper, faint and indistinct, like a memory just out of reach. Suddenly, the room shifted, the walls twisted, the floor began to bend. He stumbled back, disoriented, as the hallway stretched out before him again. But now it was different. The doors were different. The walls were darker, the air colder. He could feel it now. He He was no longer alone in the house. Everywhere he looked, shadows shifted. Faces appeared in the corners of his vision, watching him. The air was thick with the scent of something rotten, the taste of decay on his tongue. He turned a corner, and there, standing at the end of the hallway, was a door. A door he knew. He knew it. It led to the kitchen. It was the door that led to the place where he had spent countless hours as a child, his mother's voice calling him to the table, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. It was the last place he remembered before everything went blank. But now the door was covered in dark, cracked symbols carved into the wood. The kitchen was no longer the same. It was cold, empty. The stove was blackened, charred. The counters were covered in dark stains that no amount of scrubbing could erase. And then he saw it, a reflection in the dark window above the sink, his own face, pale and hollow. But there was something else there. That didn't belong. His reflection smiled. He turned quickly, his breath catching in his throat. The hallway was empty. He was alone. But that smile, that stayed with him. He ran. The hallway stretched endlessly, the walls closing in on him, the air suffocating. He could hear his footsteps, the pounding of his heart in his ears. The house was changing, twisting around him, and with each passing second, the walls felt more like a cage. He ran faster, pushing himself to the limit. He needed to escape. But where was the exit? Where was the door? The thumping started again. It was no longer just beneath the floor. It was all around him, the sound growing louder, filling the air. The walls pulsed with each beat, and the house seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. He turned, his mind reeling, searching for any escape, but all he saw was the endless stretch of the hallway, the doors that led nowhere, the rooms that kept slipping away from him. The thumping stopped. The silence was deafening. And then a voice, deep and distorted, whispered from the shadows. The room closed in around him, the darkness swallowing him whole. His scream was lost in the suffocating blackness, the house's cold embrace tightening with every passing second. And then all was still. The house was quiet again. The memories had returned. But the person who had once lived here, they were gone. And in the empty rooms, the thumping began once more.